I have a guest today who you will recognize from Newsmax. I hope you've read his column in Townhall. This guy has been everywhere. He's done it all, seen it all. And we are so grateful that he carved out a little bit of time this morning to spend with us. John Nantz, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you very much for having me.
So, first and foremost, I always have to ask any guest who is in law enforcement, why did you become a cop, John?
Well, my parents were both deaf. So I grew up in a deaf household. And so because of that, I was always having to take care of them and assist them with different things. And I think that's where that desire to help people, defend people, be of service. I think that's where that impetus came from, my childhood. So that's really how I saw law enforcement as an opportunity to help people that can't that couldn't help themselves.
I love that. So you uh, had a very storied career with the FBI. Talk about that for a couple minutes.
Well, my first assignment was to the Miami field office after graduating from Quantico. Actually, before that, I was a Greenville County deputy sheriff for about 6 years. But my first assignment was Miami, and I was assigned to a counterintelligence squad, which is what I wanted to do because I'd been in local law enforcement for a while and I wanted something different. And the counterintelligence squad was something very, very different. Very paperwork driven. It's not really suitable for everybody. I know a lot of people, especially that come from law enforcement, they don't feel like it's action packed enough, kind of a cerebral sort of endeavor, but I really enjoyed it. Did that work for about 3.5 years. Um, Tried out for Miami SWAT, got on the SWAT team, did some deployments to Haiti. Very interesting job that was for sure. From there, I went on to ground surveillance with the Special Operations Group. I did that for about 3 years and then took a transfer to the Attorney General's Protection Detail out of the Washington field office. So when Eric Holder was the Attorney General, I was assigned to his protection detail for 3.5 years, and that was a fascinating assignment. Went places I never would have gone, saw people I never would have seen. Really, really interesting work. After that, I stayed at WFO, Washington Field Office, went back to surveillance, ended up supervising the ground surveillance squad. And then the last part of my career, the last 3 years of my career, I moved over to the aviation side of the house and supervised the surveillance aviation component of Washington Field Office.
Now, let me ask you something. Is people always make comments about law enforcement and how political it has become.
Mhm.
You supervised people and you protected people on both sides, or should I say all sides of the political spectrum. Did your
That's true.
politics play a part, John?
In terms of dignitary protection, absolutely not. Now, I didn't agree with Eric Holder's politics, but I respected the office. And in fact, Eric Holder as a person, you couldn't have asked for a better person to work for. He was very polite, always very appreciative of what we did. And I tell you, the proof in the pudding is people's children often. And his kids were just as polite, just as respectful. So, complete opposite side of the political spectrum from me, but that had absolutely nothing to do with how we conducted ourselves, how we protected him, our motivations to do so had nothing to do with any of that.
And that's how it should be, right? In federal law enforcement as well as in state or local law enforcement. I have had to protect um, people during protests and demonstrations. I absolutely abhorred what they stood for. And yet I knew that they deserved to be able to express their own views. So, does it frustrate you now to see how federal law enforcement has become such a political football?
Absolutely. Well, a lot of the problems that we're seeing, I think, stem from the DEI policies that have come out of the Biden White House. So decisions are being made not with operational requirements in mind, but with political mandates in mind. So that's why we're seeing problems with capability. I think that's why we're seeing problems with, in particular with Trump's detail, at least as far as the first assassination attempt. And it's really shocking to have to talk about two assassination attempts. But the weaponization issue, the anti-law enforcement um, atmosphere that we find ourselves in, all of this stuff contributes to what we're seeing today. In fact, we know that the shooter from the most recent Trump assassination attempt had a very long criminal history. And within the last couple of years, John Lott, who is a really fantastic mind and analytical, statistical person, over the last 2 years, he's seen the arrest rates drop by 50%. So this anti-law enforcement atmosphere that's also expressed in the lack of prosecutions results in people like this disturbed individual falling through the cracks, not being appropriately adjudicated and dealt with by our judicial system, end up in the position to potentially try to assassinate a former president. So it's very disturbing to see the weaponization of the federal government. Elections have consequences, like people hear quite a bit. So you put people in power that do not support law enforcement and that put politics over people's safety, and you end up in a position like this with very dangerous and potentially lethal consequences.
Dr. Lott has been a guest on this show, and we
Uh,
absolutely adore him, and he has been doing decades of research. He very famously wrote a book called More Guns, Less Crime.
right.
And he was immediately excoriated for that. And we have seen over the years since he wrote that book, he continues to do incredible research that indeed his original premise is true in areas where you have more citizens properly and legally armed, you do tend to have less crime. And yet we are in this not just anti-police, but this atmosphere of deprosecution and decarceration. And it so negatively impacts not just law enforcement and not just the criminal justice system, but our citizens as well, doesn't it, John?
Yeah, and the proposition that an armed society is a polite society, I mean, it's borne out by the statistics, and anybody that wants to can go to Lott's website and see all the data for themselves. And it really is common sense. I mean, where does a criminal go? A criminal is going to go where he or she does not feel like they're going to meet much or any resistance. So if that is a gun-free zone, then you have criminals that are drawn to gun-free zones. That's in part why we see problems with our school systems, because they have become gun-free zones. I know that the school resource officer initiative is becoming more widespread, and I think that is a very good thing. In fact, the last school shooting that we saw involved a school resource officer who confronted that 14-year-old, and when he did so, the individual surrendered, which is usually what happens in an active shooter situation. You confront the active shooter, they either take their own life or they surrender. That's typically, statistically, what happens. So it reinforces the idea of it takes a good guy with a gun to stop a bad guy with a gun.
You know, John, I can't go to my county board of supervisors meeting without going through a metal detector and being wanded by an armed deputy. You can't go before a judge when you get a traffic ticket without going through a metal detector and having armed security right there protecting that judge. Why do you think we are so hesitant as a country to provide that same kind of security for our school children?
Well, it's become politicized, and a gun essentially is a tool of power. And if you have a government that is tilting towards totalitarianism, they don't want those tools of power available to everyone. Because quite frankly, in order to accomplish your collectivist goals, your statist goals, you have to have the power, the physical power to do that. So if the people are armed, then that thwarts that capability, or at least it instills the fear of that in politicians who might seek that kind of radical power. So I don't really, I mean, the reason why we're not protecting our schools, I think, is inexcusable. There's no reason why you can't, and some schools do have metal detectors, things of that nature. And I think the school resource program is a fantastic idea, has been for many, many years. Strengthening that is a big step forward in the right direction. I think that arming qualified school employees, I think that is a good idea as well. Frankly, if you have politicians or individuals that do not trust the citizens to be armed, then I think that speaks more to their potential intention as a politician than it does anything else.
Absolutely. And we often see now that someone, a citizen who uses a firearm or another weapon in a manner of self-defense is often arrested and prosecuted.
Yeah,
And conversely, we hear a lot of rhetoric, from the left, from activists who want more gun laws, more gun control, if you will. But yet, when every day in this country, when armed robbers and gangbangers and drug dealers are arrested with firearms, they seem to be out before the street cop finishes the paperwork. Talk
right.
about that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, think about our biggest metropolitan centers like Chicago, New York, Detroit. These are all highly restrictive. Washington, D.C., for instance, these are all highly restrictive areas in terms of gun ownership, very gun controlled areas. And these are some of the areas that experience some of our highest crime rates, some of our highest violent crime rates. So it is not proving the argument that guns or quote unquote gun violence is the problem. It's I can't remember what movie it's from, but it's I think it's a Clint Eastwood movie, maybe. Essentially, it's the evil heart that kills. It's not the tool. And in fact, when you remove guns, you see that people pick up other tools, whether it's a knife or a baseball bat or whatever it may be. So it's a thorny problem, and I don't think we have the political will to actually deal with this issue because it's a combination of a law and order emphasis with allowing the people to exercise their constitutional right to keep and bear arms.
You were both a street cop and then a federal agent. And when you look at the war on cops that we're dealing with, which is really has been going on for about 10 years, but especially for the last 4 years, we have seen not just physical attacks on law enforcement officers, but also the political attacks on the entire profession. I know you do some writing on this. What are your thoughts on where we're headed with all of that in 2024?
Hmm. Well, I think as long as take the FBI, for instance, as long as the FBI is useful to the left, then they'll continue to support what the FBI is doing in terms of some of the weaponization and the politicization that the Bureau has been involved in recently. Now, when the BLM and Antifa riots were happening, the left was attacking local law enforcement because, you know, they're symbols of law and order and they weren't politically useful. I think that if we continue to see this domination of the political left in our society, in our politics in particular, we're going to see more and more of this anti-law enforcement rhetoric, especially directed toward local law enforcement. If, you know, God forbid, you know, we have another, if we have 4 years of Harris, we're going to see increasing politicization of agencies like the FBI, continued problems at the Secret Service. At the heart of a lot of this, like I mentioned before, are DEI policies that don't emphasize merit, but emphasize decision making based on politically driven metrics, which is absolute poison for any federal agency, state agency that may be dealing with those policies. So going forward, if we have a Trump administration, that's what I'm hoping for. That's what I'm advocating for. We'll see a renewed respect for law enforcement at all levels. And I think Trump will do what Roosevelt did back in the 1920s. In fact, the Bureau at that time was in a real mess, like it is today. In fact, the Bureau back then was known as the Bureau of Investigation. And it essentially didn't have any hiring practices. So you had literally criminals carrying a Bureau of Investigation badge. So Roosevelt recognized that problem. He brought in an attorney general, Stone was his last name, Harlan Stone, in the 1920s, and he gave him a mandate to clean up the FBI. And the first thing that Harlan Stone did was appoint J. Edgar Hoover as the director. Now, like him, hate him, whatever you want to say about him, he radically transformed the FBI and kind of turned it into the better parts of what we know of the FBI today. So there's historical precedence for that. If we can get Trump into the White House, in my personal opinion, this next election cycle, then we can see an attorney general with a mandate to reform, an FBI director with a mandate to reform, and hopefully a reformed FBI, the kind of FBI that America deserves, not what it has.
Well, and of course, the National Police Association, we don't get involved in the candidates, but I'm
Sure.
curious as to what you think about, because you have been a supervisory special agent, you worked in Washington, D.C. There are some who say that federal law enforcement, and especially the FBI, needs to be taken out of Washington, needs to be decentralized, needs the headquarters to be somewhere else. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I don't think the physical location is so much of an issue. I think decentralizing for sure in terms of pulling people out of headquarters. I think headquarters has become a behemoth. Investigations should be run at the field office level. That is another huge problem with how investigations are run at the FBI. The whole reason why we dealt with Russiagate is because that investigation was conducted out of headquarters. The Hillary Clinton classified information investigation, that was all run out of headquarters. Personally, I was very disappointed to watch Director Comey essentially exonerate Hillary Clinton on national TV for doing things that, as an FBI agent, if I had done those things, my security clearance would have been immediately suspended, probably would have been fired, and most likely become the subject of a counterintelligence investigation.
So I gotta switch gears because I only have about 3 minutes left. How did you start writing for Townhall? Because people really need to follow your articles. Your articles they're well written, of course, but they're incredibly diverse and they're very thought provoking. Every time I read something you've written, I look up 5 other things that I get interested in. Talk about how that started.
My wife and I used to attend CPAC quite a bit, and we got to know Katie Pavlich way back in the day. And in fact, when she was writing her first book, Fast and Furious, I was assigned to the Attorney General's protection detail at that time. So we had that sort of common interest. And when we met at CPAC, we talked about that for a bit. And then I reached out to her later with a writing sample, and she was gracious enough to allow me to start writing at Townhall. So that's kind of how that happened. Townhall is a great organization, in my opinion, not that I would be biased, but some of the best in conservative news and opinion that's currently available. So I really enjoy writing for them. They've been really good to me. And I do like to address a variety of topics. I don't like to just talk about Bureau stuff. And I try to call out the Bureau when it does the wrong thing. And I try to give credit where credit is due when the Bureau does the right thing. And they're still, they're harder to find these days, but there still are examples of the Bureau doing the right thing. And by the way, let me just say there are a lot of good men and women at the FBI, brick agents doing the job day in and day out.
They absolutely are, and risking their lives doing it. And I have to brag, Arizona's own Katie Pavlich, by the way.
Right.
We're very proud of her
Right.
here in Arizona and all the hard work that she does. John, where can people find your column? Where can they find you? Your social media? Give all of it to us.
Well, you can find me at townhall.com, but actually the best place to find my stuff is X. I'm on X, Instagram, Facebook, Truth Social, all of it at thejohnnantz or at thejohnnantz.
Absolutely. And I recommend that everybody absolutely follows you. John, I can't thank enough for spending time with us today. And I'll see you soon on Newsmax. And if you'd like more information about the National Police Association, visit us at nationalpolice.org.
Join the National Police Association in supporting our brave men and women in blue. Every day they put their lives on the line to keep us safe. But they need our help to continue their mission. Black Lives Matter, Antifa, progressive prosecutors, and the rest of the anti-police forces receive millions in donations from extremists like George Soros and woke companies like Amazon, Coca-Cola, Microsoft, and Google, to name a few. The National Police Association is fighting them in courts around the country, including the United States Supreme Court, defending officers who are being attacked for doing their jobs. Additionally, the National Police Association works year-round to pass tough-on-crime legislation to put and keep criminals behind bars. Consider going to nationalpolice.org and donating just $5 to keep us in the fight. Together, we can win. That is National